Hello and welcome to the 1865 Match Report with your host, me, Rich Ferraro. And it's Sunday the 30th of October, as if it's not bad having Monday-itis. Anyway, Forest fans will not be going to bed happy this evening after a 5-0 defeat away at the Emirates Stadium, as Arsenal basically cemented their place at the top of the table by scoring 4 second-half goals and, frankly, blowing Forest absolutely out of the water. In a minute, we're going to hear from Tom, who was at the game. But first of all, we'll go through the team news. And it's pretty simple team news for Forest today. There was just the one change. Nico Williams dropped out from left back so that the more natural left-sided defender, Renan Lodi, could come in on the into the back four. So we had Henderson in goal, Aurier and Lodi at full-back with Cook and McKenna at centre-half, Remo Freuler as the number 6 with Yates and Kouyaté either side, and Taiwo Awoniyi supported by Morgan Gibbs-White and Jesse Lingard. Now, Tom, did you have a wonderful day out in London today?
No, not really. If you look at the result, I just say a bit similar to the Man City game. Really, I thought after the last couple of games, I thought we've actually cracked it. And in terms of, I'm not saying like we're going to go on like a winning spree, but I thought after the Brighton game and the Liverpool game, we might have like got to grips with the intensity of the Premier League, etc. And I thought keep them quiet for the first 20 minutes and try and build on that. But 5 minutes, 5 minutes in, and we're already 1-0 down.
Yeah, so I got the impression, I will come to the goal in a second, but just taking the first half as a whole, I got the impression that Steve Cooper's game plan was probably to replicate what Forest did away at Brighton. And of course, in the first half at Brighton, it looked absolutely horrendous, was not inspiring. You were really depressed after that, so God knows how you feel this evening. But the trouble is that Forest did concede after 5 minutes. Now, you could argue it was a good cross by Bukayo Saka. You could argue it was a brave header by Gabriel Martinelli to put it into the bottom corner. But every single stage of that, from when we gave the ball away near the edge of our own box through to that, it was preventable, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like when you look back, Martinelli's ran past a few Forest players because he's had to come from the left-hand side. And you know what Saka's going to do? I know he's relatively young, but he's made a career out of it so far where he would just jink on to his left foot, put a cross in, and obviously you're going to get a run across the first man or whatever. And that happened. And Lodi's let Saka come inside too easily. I think it's Freuler who should have been, or who didn't pick Martinelli up, and he's got in front of, I think it's Cook or McKenna, and it's 1-0 in there. And you think, oh, here we go again. But as the game went on in the first half, it wasn't great, but I thought after that first set, the early setback, I thought Forest actually dealt with them. I mean, there was a hairy moment when one was cleared off the line, but I thought Forest dealt with them okay, and you just think, well, just try and do the same in the second half, but obviously it didn't happen.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that in the first 10 minutes, even before they scored, Arsenal were really trying to hit us hard and high. They were pressing us high up into the Forest half, and it was causing all kinds of problems. And it's very much a rearguard action. Now, a rearguard action against a team like Brighton, who don't have a natural forward, and although they've got Leandro Trossard, who's having a good season, they don't have a huge amount of goal threat. You can get away with it there, can't you? Against Arsenal, who are top of the league, and even though they've not been winning by the same margins, they have still consistently been getting results. So, you don't get to the top of the league by accident. In the first 10 minutes, it looked like it was going to be a landslide. So it's actually quite a pleasant surprise when from after about 20 minutes, Forest did make a fist of it, didn't they?
Yeah, they had like a couple of openings, etc. But I think there was a 5 or 10 minute period where we actually got in the faces a bit. I think Gibbs-White put in a bit of a crunching challenge on Xhaka. There was a couple of challenges on Jesus and Martinelli and etc. And you think yeah, you got to compete. But after after come out for the second half, they just didn't do that. They just basically they may, like I said, it was a bit like the Man City game. They may as well have put the red carpet out for them and had a guard on them, because I just think when we're going to these away grounds at the moment, I know we've only played Arsenal and Man City, who are basically top four away from home, but it's like they're giving them too much respect. And I think, okay, we're not going to have the quality to match them, but just ruffle a few feathers, just get in the faces. And Yates tried to do it with Xhaka a couple of times, where he's tried giving them like a nudge, etc. But yeah, I think it was too nicey nice today, and it's just you got to compete in the Premier League if quality's against you, if that makes sense.
Mm. And you did mention there's that little spell of about 5-10 minutes where Forest it looked like they were going to have a go, and there was a particular moment. So we're 1-0 down, and the ball went down the right hand side, and it kind of went into the middle of the box. Jesse Lingard, he received the ricochet. He went to hit it kind of low and true, and it was blocked by Gabriel Magalhaes in the defence. So it was blocked at source, and you can't help but thinking that was the chance. Something we've talked about so many times. That was the chance.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't know which way the game was going to go, because it might have frustrated Arsenal fans, and they might have got on the back of the players. But no, that was the only real opening. And we had, I think, Lingard actually had a shot in the first half which went wide. But yeah, apart from that, nothing. But too many players are like taking too many touches. We did get into some decent openings, but is that one touch too many, or a bit hesitant with the pass and everything? There was a couple of times, I don't want to just single him out, because there was not a lot of great performances out there today, obviously. But Gibbs White had a couple of opportunities of obviously playing somebody in. It's that touch too many. They get an extra man behind the ball, and then you got to go back and we're just not quick enough with the ball again. But like I says, in the last couple of games, you thought that Forest would turn in a corner. And Martin the Midland said on the group chat that we're back to square one, and like you come back from the game and you think, I won't go that far, but on reflection, it is, because you think that you're putting things in place. Then you watch the game back on the highlights, etc., and we'll just like shoot yourselves in the foot, and you're still making the same mistakes where you think you've got them out of your system in the last couple of weeks. But what is it? Minus 20 goals now. And the next two games are crucial, because we're not getting many points on the road, and our home form's been patchy, hasn't it? Those two games against Fulham and Bournemouth, they were the ones which were like put a spotlight on our season, where we should have won those games. Then obviously we've had an okay bit of form in terms of the last two games against Brighton and Liverpool. Then we'll come back crashing down to earth. The next two games before the World Cup, we've got to get maximum points. Or 4. I think 4 points will be okay, but we've got to look for maximum points, because if we come back after the World Cup and you're obviously caught adrift, then it's going to be uphill struggle for the rest of the season.
Well, we will come back to some of that a little bit later on, along with Steve Cooper's assessment of the game. Now, unfortunately for you, Tom, we do need to talk about the second half, because we'd mentioned Bukayo Saka early on, and he'd actually suffered from injury quite early on after a challenge with Renan Lodi. Now, I'm not entirely sure how much of a foul it was. I think Saka landed quite heavily, and so he was substituted after 20-something minutes. And Reece Nelson, a bit of a forgotten man, really. I guess if you're not an Arsenal fan, he's a bit of a forgotten man. He'd actually apparently spent last season on loan at Feyenoord, which I never realised. So he came on the 27th minute to replace Bukayo Saka and play on the right of Arsenal's kind of front three. And, you know, he got his goal very early on in the second half. And although he showed real twinkle toes and he created the chance for himself, he cut inside, and because he'd feigned his shot when the ball came in from the left-hand side. He'd feigned his shot, and he'd basically taken, I think it was McKenna and Freuler out the game by feigning to shoot. Then he cut inside on his left foot, and then from there he shot. And it was a relatively powerfully struck but lacking in direction type of shot. And Henderson saved it, but he spilled it straight back into Nelson's path. On his stronger right foot, he then made no mistake. He hit it really hard and into the top corner above the head of Steve Cook, who's on the line. So again, you kind of say, well, decent finish, but utterly preventable, yeah?
Yeah, and I don't want to be like single players out, but Dean Henderson's got international aspiration playing for England. I don't think he's going to get into the World Cup squad because of obviously the three keepers in front of him in terms of Ramsdale, who was at the other end today, Pickford and Pope. But I've looked back on it, and in the Premier League, you should expect him to obviously power that away from goal, and he's just powered it straight into Reece Nelson's path, and he's just hit it in top corner. So, yeah, again, yet again, preventable goal. And I was expecting a bit more from Henderson there. He should have powered it away. I'm not a goalkeeper, and I will never say I am a goalkeeper, but looking at that, you'd expect a Premier League goalkeeper to power it away from the danger zone.
And then just 3 minutes later, Nelson got his second goal. Martin Ødegaard on the right-hand side cuts the ball in. Nelson kind of does a very deft kind of flick to put it across the goal, past Henderson into the bottom corner. That's one where you can't blame the keeper. But again, it just felt soft, didn't it?
Yeah, he got in front of Ryan Yates. Whether Ryan Yates is obviously just a lack of concentration for that split second and got punished for it. But yeah, he's got in front of Yates, and if it's the other way around, Yates gets himself between man and ball and either clears it away or obviously doesn't get a touch on it, then it might be mopped up by whoever's behind him. But he got in front, and 3-0, and it's basically, it's game over at 2-0, but 3-0, it's definitely game over, isn't it? Especially against Arsenal at the Emirates.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna mention that. So when Nelson scored his first and Arsenal's second, 4 minutes into the second half. Now, I wasn't at the ground, but I was thinking, okay, that's it. This is going to be a tough afternoon, and I did have visions of Man City. At the ground, did you have that same feeling?
Yeah, because they come out with a point to prove second half, and we just never laid a glove on them. By say, I think it was 55th minute when the third goal went in or something like that. It was game over. It was basically a damage limitation exercise from them. My dad basically says this could be how they were coming at us and punishes with the pockets of space we was leaving. Yeah, my dad says this could be 6 or 7 very easily because they just kept cutting through us at will, really.
Yeah, and so Nelson scored on 49 and 52 minutes, and on 57 minutes came what is the goal of the match. And I'd say, I mean, this is one of those whereby you want to look at it from as many angles as possible. Thomas Partey coming onto the ball towards the kind of edge of the D kind of area, 25-ish maybe yards out. And you look at the flight of the ball, it curls outside of the goal and then back into the top corner. And for all that Henderson was culpable earlier for Nelson's goal, there's no keeper in the world's going to stop that one, is he? That's just a really tremendous hit, isn't it?
Yeah, but again, he's on the edge of the box, no pressure on him. And as soon as the ball come out to him, because he scored a very similar goal at the other end against Spurs earlier in the season, and seeing it's come out to him, I thought, this is 4-0. And he's lashed it in top corner. I mean, okay, Henderson's got no chance with it, but there's a sincere lack of pressure on him. Is basically he could pick his corner basically, and that's what he's done in 4-0. And yet again, we're on our way to another away thrashing.
Yeah. Let's just skip ahead because Arsenal did have more shots and more chances and so on. And in terms of the match stats, I think what I'd say is that it is as sobering as you'd expect. So 69% possession to Arsenal. They had 24 shots compared to Forest's 5, and 10 of those were on target compared to Forest only having 2 on target. And one of those was the Lingard shot that we mentioned earlier. And I think there was a very tame effort by Freuler, which was pretty easy for Aaron Ramsdale to gather. So yeah, Arsenal were dominant, and let's skip forward to 78 minutes. Can Martin Ødegaard, who's Arsenal's captain and has become a bit of a talisman for them, and he kind of got into the box, and he did hit a really nice shot at the end of it, but again, Forest just stood off and they didn't challenge. There was nothing. They'd given up, hadn't they?
Yeah. It's not a nice way to put it, but yeah, they threw the towel in at that point. I mean, we've had games, obviously not at the same level, but when you're playing against a more superior team and they're just knocking the ball around, and physically and mentally you're knackered, aren't you? And when that 6th goal went in, it was just a matter of time, and you just think, well, the 5th goal, it was just a matter of time, wasn't it? When after the 4th went in, the 5th was going to come in, because Forest was just chasing shadows at that point.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, at 56 minutes, I think I can't remember if it's just before. I think it's just before Thomas Partey scored his goal. Forest had made a double change, so Gibbs White and Lingard came off for Brennan Johnson and Emmanuel Dennis, and it was. I mean, you mentioned Gibbs White putting that nasty challenge in on Xhaka, which is one of those whereby you don't want to. In the olden days, it wasn't a foul, but it definitely was a yellow card in this day and age. But I thought that Gibbs White had his poorest game in a Forest shirt since he's joined, didn't you?
Yeah, his passing was well off. I mean, it wasn't just a bit off; it was well off. It was like. And yeah, he wasn't at the races. And I thought in previous games he's probably trying a bit too hard to justify the whatever price tag was paid for him. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't the only one who had a poor game today. But from a creative source, yeah, unfortunately he was absolutely no-how today.
Let's just talk about the other subs. So at 4-0 down, Nico Williams came on at left back for Renan Lodi, and Joe Worrell came on for Taiwo Awoniyi, which meant we went to a kind of a 5-3-2 with Johnson and Dennis as the forwards. I mean, if ever there's a case of there's planned substitutions, and then there's, well, what's the blooming point, isn't there? So
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, that's shutting the door after the horse has bolted, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, just for the record as well, Lewis O'Brien came on 81 minutes. I guess it was just to give him probably a planned substitution to give him a few minutes, but what difference did it make, really? So we have to say that it was a horrendous day at the office, and it was a game that finished 5-0 to Arsenal.
The 1865 Match Report. Ahora que todo está abierto, ¿cómo vas a llevar a tu mamá, papá, hijos, abuelos, primos, tíos, tías, amigos, amigas, vecinos, colegas a tus lugares favoritos? Lo fácil es que Amtrak los lleva a más de 500 destinos con asientos súper cómodos y cuartos privados. Lo difícil va a ser ponerse de acuerdo a dónde ir. Tus lugares favoritos a solo un Amtrak de distancia. Encuentra tu ruta en la app de Amtrak o en amtrak.com.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to the 1865 Match Report. Now, we've given you some of the match facts, and Tom, just while we're having in the break there, you were telling me something about Forest's Brazilian left-back Renan Lodi. Do you want to share that again with us?
Yeah, well, and another thing, just because you're Brazilian doesn't mean you're world-class. So Renan Lodi's made 5 starts for Forest. Forest have conceded 19 goals. And average minutes per goal conceded is 21 minutes.
Ouch. Yeah, and it's a strange one. I put Lodi in the same category as Remo Freuler a few weeks ago, where I was going, I think there's something there, but what they have to do is get up to speed with the Premier League. Now, that's probably pretty difficult if you're a defender. So I will say that it's not been going well for Renan Lodi. I have no idea if that's going to be something he can overcome. I don't think he's a bad player. I'm just not sure that he's able to get to grips with the Premier League.
Yeah, it's a bit like Lingard as well. I think Baz said it a couple of weeks ago, that he's basically a confidence player, and if he's not getting much of the ball, and he is putting the effort in trying to get the ball and close down and everything, but Jesse Lingard's quality is on the ball, and we don't have the ball enough to see that quality.
Yeah, and what I'd say is that against Liverpool, Lingard, he showed he's a player who needs to play with a smile on his face. And if he's not doing that, if that first half effort had gone in, then we might have seen something different. But equally, if he'd already scored a goal this season, then that first half effort, he probably would have hit it with a bit more direction, a bit more power. He would have been less likely to hit the first defender, don't you think?
Yeah, pretty much. I think with Lingard, he just needs a goal from somewhere just to just give him that kick start, because the Knives are going to be out looking at his vice career. He hasn't really made many assists, if any, and he hasn't scored any goals yet, and that's going to be like the mark next to his name if he's been a success or not. And we know he's got quality there, because obviously he's shown it in the past when he was at Man U, representing England and West Ham, but we just don't see enough of the ball for him to obviously thrive on that quality what he has got.
Earlier on, I did say we'll hear what Steve Cooper had to say. So this is what he said in his post-match interview.
Well, the situation we're in, the bare minimum that we need in every game is to fight, regardless of tactics and anything else. And I just thought we were not strong enough in the duels, not competitive enough, didn't run enough. Arsenal obviously are a really good team and top the league for a reason. But to give them the freedom to play and the like I said, the lack of fight in the duels was we've only got ourselves to blame. I mean, okay, we got off to a poor start and go 1-0 down, which was against the game plan and how we let them get the cross in. And we were okay then for the rest of the first half. It was how we thought the game would look, and we were starting to get a little bit of threat in the game, a couple of good set pieces and some efforts on goal. But then the start of the second half is just something you cannot do in any game of football, especially in this league. And like I said, it came down to the non-negotiables of wanting to run, wanting to fight and not get beat. And the game was took away from us quickly in the second half because of that.
So, Tom, what I would say there is that there's two things that strike me. Number one is it confirms what we talked about in part one of this match report, which is that the game plan was, okay, let's try and contain Arsenal in the first half. And so he was annoyed about conceding that goal. But overall, Forest stuck to that game plan in the first half. But in the second half, the game plan went out the window because of what Steve Cooper called the non-negotiables. And you alluded to earlier, which is that the players just weren't working hard enough. They downed tools, maybe not deliberately, but they just weren't doing the stuff that they need to do. Forest will need to be playing towards the top of their game every single week to have a chance of getting points in any game in this division. And just like you mentioned against Man City, I mean, Leicester's the obvious comparison as well. The players didn't do enough. And I'd mentioned Gibbs-White, probably his worst game in a Forest shirt. I would say same for loads of players, actually. Remo Freuler comes to mind as well. We've seen other players who've had bad games, but Remo Freuler did not look like an international midfielder. You look at the fact that he was playing against his international midfield teammate in Granit Xhaka, and you just look at the fact that they just look as if they don't even look as if they're playing the same sport today, did they?
No, and I mean, 3,000 Forest fans paid the money, etc. And we tried to back them as much as we can, but when the goals are just keep going past you and everything, even the fans started to lose heart in certain aspects of the second half, where you're trying to support them and chant and everything, but yeah, you're not seeing that replicated on the pitch, and it's just the bare minimum, especially in the Premier League, is compete. And like Steve Cooper alluded to in his post-match interview with the BBC, we just didn't do that, and by the hour mark, game was well and truly gone.
Now, Steve Cooper was pretty annoyed, and in fact, Radio Nottingham made the point. You wouldn't have heard this because you're obviously still in London at this moment, but Radio Nottingham making the point that he looked fed up. It's not very often, he's a fairly even-tempered guy, isn't he? He doesn't get too high when he wins and doesn't get too low when he loses. But he was not in a good mood after the game today. Does that give you any solace?
Yeah, well, it's a hard one. Even though when they went in for half-time, he's like, well, regroup and everything. Okay, we're 1-0 down and everything. But yeah, everything what would have been mentioned in the half-time break has just been thrown out the window. And it's just like you'd look at those players and you think, what's the point in saying anything if you're going to do your own thing and not listen to, i.e. the manager and Steve Cooper, do your own thing. And like I said, within 15 minutes of the second half, game's well and truly gone. So yeah, you'd be banging your head against a brick wall. You put things in place and not to do this, but do this, etc. And if the players aren't doing that, you would sound disheartened after the game, regardless of who you're playing against, if the players are not obeying to your instructions, what you've given.
I just want to come on to something that you mentioned to me before we started recording this podcast, which is that as a fan, you felt a little bit annoyed by seeing the reactions of some players at the final whistle, and in fact of Steve Cooper, because obviously there's quite a lot of players there who know each other, maybe from the England setup and so on. So tell our listeners what you told me.
Yeah, so at the end of the game, Steve Cooper embraced Reece Nelson, and I know Steve Cooper's very much, like you said, you can't do any wrong in a lot of Forest players. A lot of Forest fans' eyes with obviously what he's achieved and everything. And I know he's got like a lot of plaudits from his time with England. But yeah, he was embracing Reece Nelson at the end, and yeah, Morgan Gibbs-White's having like cracking jokes with players and everything, and from Arsenal. And yeah, it's just like it's thrown back in your face. We've just like been stood there for 90 minutes watching them get well and truly beaten, and we haven't competed. I mean, yeah, if you want to do that thing, do it down the tunnel, but yeah, just don't do it in front of the Forest fans who have obviously travelled all that way on a Sunday afternoon, etc., paid good money, and we haven't had our money's worth out of it, and we've seen as being well and truly beaten. And yeah, like I said, I don't want to be critical of Steve Cooper because I'm, like most Forest fans, I'm thankful for everything he's done in getting us into this position. But yeah, just do it behind closed doors, i.e. down the tunnel and not on the pitch, when obviously majority of Forest fans are still there at the end because of the bare minimum. Obviously, we wanted Forest to compete today and they haven't done it. Then obviously, as we've mentioned, we don't want to single players out, but Gibbs-White's had his poorest game in a Forest shirt and his cracking jokes at the end, which if you put that much effort in cracking and jokes at the end as your performance, we might have been a bit better off. But yeah, we've as a team today, it's been a very, very poor day down in London. Yeah,
bad optics, I believe, is the phrase. Now, let's hear from some opposition fans. Tom appeared on the Away Gooners preview show, and here's what they had to say after today's game.
Hello, guys. This is Bob here from the Away Gooners podcast. Contrary to the scoreline, it was a game of two halves. The first half, although we did score an earlier goal, it was a pretty even game, I should say, until halftime. And in fact, I would go on to say the scoreline could have been much different had Lingard converted his chance. That was probably one of the key moments, I think, which Forrest really missed going into the second half. Because had he really scored that goal, he was in a wonderful position, as we all saw. But he quite couldn't, convert that to a goal. But that was actually the closest that Forrest ever came into the game. But then if I look into the second half, it's quite blatant fact that the game was pretty much disastrous. You were completely unorganized, and whatever that Forest worked on, the Liverpool game last weekend was completely let go, and it was all one-way traffic. In fact, it came to a point where Arsenal were sort of playing around in your D-box area, and they could have even scored more than had they been more clinical. So that was actually the thoughts on the game. It almost felt like every one of the Forest players were pretty much having an off day, and none of them could really, make anything click. And on the contrary, the Arsenal players were completely on a roll in everything that they were doing. Were actually sort of, ticking in the box. Odegaard and Partey, they pretty much controlled the whole game, I felt. And they had more time and space on the ball that they could do literally anything with the game. It's as an Arsenal fan, I probably felt that the only thing which lagged in this whole game is the fact that Jesus, with all the things that he were doing on the pitch, still couldn't get a goal. Where to reflect what's Forest chances, towards the end of the season, I say that it would be pretty much tough for you guys to actually stay up in the league. I mean, as much as the fact that I want Forest as a historical club to be in the league, they are such a beautiful team to watch. Still, it's going to be pretty tough, I would say, because every other team, who are actually with them in the lower half of the table are sort of, picking up points. Everton, Leicester, they are sort of there. So for the fortunes to be, completely turning into our favor, you have to be making the right things and then possibly not lose concentration, just like how you did with Arsenal over the weekend. You have to be pretty much holding on to your things through the 90 minutes and then somehow play every game like a cup final. Until you get there. I'm sure you guys are not new to it, having experienced a similar thing last season as well when you were down to the bottom of the table in the championship. So you have to be producing such a similar displays in every game for you to be back into reckoning. And if I were to count it as an achievement, even staying up like 17th or slightly above that is still would be a massive achievement from where you are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Bob. Now, Tom, you mentioned the league table a little earlier on, and having looked okay when we recorded our discussion show midweek, it's not looking insurmountable, but the big concern is Forest goal difference, isn't it? So we're still obviously at the bottom of the table on 9 points. Wolves are a point ahead of us. Leicester are a point ahead of them on 11. And then there's 3 teams on 12 and Bournemouth on 13 points in 14th position before we get to Everton and West Ham in 12th and 13th on 14 points. So if Forest can make hay with those home matches, then actually it could potentially other results notwithstanding, put them in a decent position before the World Cup break. But our goal difference is -20, which is by distance the worst in the league. The next is Bournemouth on -16. Even Wolves have got -13. So these are the kinds of things we need to be avoiding, these tankings, don't we?
Yeah, pretty much. And we've had the 3 away games we've had where we've had a tonking. Man City we've let 6 in, 4 at Leicester, so obviously 5 today, which is obviously 15 goals. And in those 3 games we've scored no goals. Mm-hmm. And I got criticised after the Brighton game for being a bit depressed because of how we played, especially in that first half. And goals are going to keep you in this league, but okay, we played really well last week against Liverpool, but we've got to stop having these tonkings away from home. And even if we are going to get a tonking, we need, like when Leicester got heavily beaten at Spurs, they still managed to score a couple of goals. And we can't even do that, just to bring our minus goal difference down a bit. We've got to avoid these tonkings. After the next 2 home games against Brentford and Palace, we've got Man U away and Chelsea. And I mean, okay, I know Chelsea got beat 4-1 or whatever it was yesterday against Brighton. But yeah, we're going to, even if you're not going to win the game, and okay, you might get beaten, but let's try and keep it down to 2 at least, just to give us a bit of a chance at the end of the season, because you don't want to like go into the last few games of the season, you still got a chance in staying up, but then obviously your goal difference is against you. So yeah, we're stating the obvious, we've got to stop these Tonkins, especially against the big teams, and even with Leicester around us. And that was still a horrible night in Leicester a few weeks ago when we lost 4-0 against a team who are going to be in and around us come the end of the season.
And it was nice of us to kickstart Leicester's season for them, wasn't it? So, I mean, the other thing that's becoming very apparent is that home form is if Forest are going to avoid the drop. And let's be honest, I think none of us want to get relegated, but I think there's a reasonable contingent of Forest fans who will accept that relegation is a possibility. But if it's going to happen, don't go down with a whimper. At least make a fight of it. And if we're going to do that, either have a good chance of staying up or to go down fighting, home form is going to be absolutely crucial, isn't it? So in that sense, it's a good job that we've got 2 home games coming up, and we really need to. I mean, okay, it's not been plain sailing, but generally at home, the fans and the home atmosphere means that the players can't get away with that kind of lack of application that we've seen in those 3 matches you mentioned.
No, definitely not. But the thing is, though, from the West Ham game to the Liverpool game, I know, okay, we've got a draw in that against Villa, but even between the 2 wins, it's too much far apart for my liking to. So, yeah, it makes the next 2 games even more crucial because we missed an absolute golden opportunity against Bournemouth and Fulham.
Yeah.
And now we've got to then the next 2 games against Brentford and Palace. They just highlight the need for us to get. We've got to have a minimum of 4 points in my eyes. And I don't think just 1 win and a defeat. I think we've got to get at least 4 points to give us a chance going into the New Year period just after the World Cup.
Yep. It's hard to argue with that. And with that, we're going to call an end to this match report. So I'm going to say a very big thank you to you, Tom. Thank you also to the Away Gooners podcast for hosting you and contributing to today's match report. And thank you to you, listener, for joining us. I'm sorry it wasn't a happier occasion, but we will be back with a match report after the next 2 home matches and a bit of a discussion before we go into the World Cup break. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you soon.